Hello and welcome to the Solutions Scoop. I'm Ravi Venkataraman.
And I'm Amanda Tepper. Ravi and I are co-founders of the Chestnut Solutions Institute, an independent forum dedicated to advancing the future of the investment solutions industry. Here at The Scoop, we examine the latest solutions marketplace developments and speak directly with solutions industry leaders. Our guests span the investment ecosystem, from OCIOs to asset owners, investment consultants, asset managers, and other key industry stakeholders.
These conversations are an important part of the Institute's mission to improve transparency and help establish standards and best practices across the solutions industry by educating asset owners, providers, and all other industry stakeholders. Let's get to today's scoop.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Tepper, Managing Partner at Chestnut Advisory Group and co-founder of the Chestnut Solutions Institute. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's roundtable on holistic value measurement of solutions providers and particularly OCIOs, which is what we're going to be focused on today. We have two fantastic speakers and a lot to get to. So before I introduce our two speakers, let me take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the Chestnut Solutions Institute as context for our discussion. By the way, if you have any questions as we go, please put them in the chat box. We're going to address them as we go, and whatever questions we can't get to today, we'll get back to you offline. So today we're here to discuss Chestnut's new solutions provider evaluation framework, holistic value measurement, or HVM for short. Chestnut has two businesses, both of which are kind of represented in the webinar today. We have Chestnut Advisory Group, which we've been around for over 13 years now. We're a management consulting firm, and we advise asset managers and solutions providers, of course, which include OCIOs, and we help them with all elements of strategy and go-to-market in their business. That work led us to more and more the OCIO space and the solution space, which is the fastest growing piece of the asset management industry. So 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now, my partner Ravi and I co-founded the Chestnut Solutions Institute, which is an independent forum for investment solutions providers and their partners. And we're dedicated to advancing the future of the investment solutions industry. A big part of our mission is public education, and that's exactly what we're trying to do today with this webinar. So thank you all for joining us. What you can see here at the bottom is a wide range of engagement that we've been doing in the marketplace just since we founded. So this is one of many public events, all of which are available on our website, chestnutadvisory.com. We've also published a lot of research and thought leadership, and this new evaluation framework that we're going to be talking about today was the result of last year's research and a working group, which I'm going to be telling you more about in a minute. We also, for our member firms, have member forums, and that's where we share early parts of our research, early feedback, and hear from leaders in the industry about what's happening and what's coming. And then we bring that to our public education over time. So with that, let me introduce today's speakers. Josh White, who is head of institutional portfolio strategy in JP Morgan's OCIO business. He wears a lot of hats. That's the one we're focusing on today. And Josh has been a fantastic member of the Chestnut Solutions Institute. JP Morgan was a founding member. Josh has been involved in all of our working groups and was particularly active in framework. So Josh, would you like to add anything about yourself and JP Morgan's OCIO business?
Yeah, sure. But first, just thanks for having me join to be able to talk about this important topic. But I think, yeah, look, our team is focused on institutional portfolio solutions writ large, focusing on OCIO, sleeve mandates. Before I joined JP Morgan, I was in the consulting business within Willis Towers Watson, helped them grow their OCIO business. And so I kind of carry a little bit of that background with me, as well as, moving very much into an asset management, more investment type culture. And so on a day-to-day basis, I'm thinking about, how do I help a client holistically, but also provide great client service, but then also have to deliver investment results. And so I think just looking across all those different areas is what we're going to be talking a lot about today. So again, thanks for having us and having me. And I'll kick it over, I think, to Ravi or back to Amanda.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, I'll do a quick intro of Ravi and then pass it over to him. So he's my very esteemed partner here at Chestnut and the co-founder with me of the Chestnut Solutions Institute. What Ravi brings to Chestnut that not everybody knows is he was the original founder of Mercer's OCIO business, along with many other things he did in his long, illustrious career at Mercer. You may have heard of them. They are now the largest OCIO in the world currently. So Ravi knows a thing or two about OCIO. He then went to MFS, where again, he wore a lot of really important hats on the distribution side and the thought leadership side, but he founded and led their solutions team. So solutions, of course, as Josh just said, encompasses a lot more than full portfolio OCIO mandates. And that's why we called it the Chestnut Solutions Institute, because that's where the growth is. And that's how investors' needs are solved, which at the end of the day, of course, is the job of asset management firms. So Ravi, let me pass it over to you to add your thinking on holistic value measurement, the Chestnut Solutions Institute, and et cetera.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And good morning and welcome, everyone. We're going to take a couple of minutes to just explain what this framework is and, most importantly, why it matters. So what is it? It's a more holistic way of evaluating, monitoring, tracking, doing due diligence on the solutions and OCIO set of capabilities of a provider. So that lens is from the intermediary and the buyer-client lens. On the flip side, we think there's a powerful value proposition for many of you who might be providers. We think it's a more holistic way of presenting your value proposition to your clients, because let's face it, over the last 20 years, there's been increasing pressure and increasingly narrow focus on this industry, and the valuable services that you all provide, tend to get commoditized over time. So we think being able to articulate the proposition from your side also is extremely valuable. This framework is really optimized towards solutions and OCIO, but I would just say for those of you that are single strategy, traditional long-only managers, there are elements of this you could really take to better articulate the services and the capabilities that you bring to the table. Because let's face it, most asset managers are embedding thought leadership, service, and other things even in their traditional relationships. Just digging a little bit deeper, why is it needed? We've got 4 really important reasons here. First and foremost, to improve governance for investment committees and boards. I think we could all relate, if you think of all the relationships you've served over the years, most fiduciaries don't have formal training programs when they have new members come in to get on the same page. They learn it sort of on the job, if you will. So we think this framework actually gives some tangible lenses for which investment committees can use to get on the same page faster and make better decisions. The next 2 are probably the most important, which is to bring a systematic, unbiased, consistent, uniform approach to provider evaluation and resist anchoring bias. And by resisting anchoring bias, I mean not getting, for example, fixated on the last data point of performance for the last 1 year or 3 months at an extreme. A very powerful offshoot of that is to encourage asset owners to lengthen their time horizons for valuation. So if you step back a little bit, you get a bigger picture, right? So that's what we're trying to do. And a lot of folks have talked about the problem of short-termism in our industry, and the easy access to information and data has almost gone to an extreme. We think presenting a framework that kind of looks at things much more holistically is a good governance tool because it reminds folks not to be too short-term oriented. On the solutions side, we think there's also a very valuable use case to get the client to move beyond the narrow focus on performance and fees. You present your value add, you present your investment process and philosophy, but over time, as meetings get more routine, it tends to become more performance and fees oriented. And we think demonstrating a framework like this of all the investment and non-alpha that you folks provide to buyers is very valuable and needs to be constantly brought to the forefront. And finally, the last point, which is common to both asset owners and providers, is to encourage a partnership approach. We hear time and again in the survey work that we do is clients really want, they're doing more with less, partnering deeper with a fewer number of providers. The OCIO phenomena and solutions provider is a particular case because you don't have 10, 15 providers, you typically have one. So who can use it? Touched on asset owners and solutions providers, but we also think anyone else who's doing due diligence, monitoring, intermediary can also use this framework.
Before we dig, let's go back and want to ask Josh to weigh in here to give us his perspective because he's been involved from the very beginning on this creation of this. So, Josh, we talked, you and I have had many conversations about how fees and performance alone are not the primary drivers for the growth of solutions in OCIO in the first place. But then a lot of external factors can force everyone to only talk about that and make really huge decisions, long-term decisions based only on those factors, which weren't the reasons in the first place. So we've talked about what gets lost in the shuffle and then how when investment committees change hands, things can change. So can you share a little bit of your kind of overview on this?
Yeah. So, holistic value measurement is, certainly it's how you define and get aligned on what value truly means in a delegated relationship. The best analogy I can think of is that we're all, I think, consumers of like these self-improvement books where How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Grit, The Power of Now, that's a favorite of mine. And I think what we all probably can relate to is like when you read that information, there's a big chunk of it that you already see in yourself and things that you probably do. But then there's like the new insights that you like find by reading these books. But then the thing that these books do, and what I think the holistic value measurement does, is it just puts a bit of a framework around it so that you can, I think, just stay up to date on, I discover the things that matter over time. You hit on a key point, but governance, having discipline to review these things on a consistent basis, that's going to be extremely helpful when there's leadership changes, new board members, you have, governance transition. Those things happen as normal course of business. And the last thing you want is when you've been aligned with a group of people for a very long time, things start to change either drastically or slowly. And you all of a sudden get to a spot where you're not exactly delivering on the things that matter to the organization or the folks that are in the position of overseeing it at the time. And I think this is just one of those things that is super helpful for that. I think a lot of it in some respects has helped me think retrospectively, looking at our current book. But I think there's also just value in prospecting, RFPs, getting aligned on these things from day one. Because if you can clarify what their priorities are before they make decisions, that's obviously going to lead to a better long-term outcome. And I think we're all, I think, of the mindset that, I never want to lose new business. Let's be clear, we never want to lose a pitch or anything of that nature. But we also want to make sure they're hiring, folks for the right reason. Because I think what we're all looking for is long-term, meaningful relationships. And I think this is one of those things that can be helpful towards it. Because And this is I say this often, but what always gets you hired isn't necessarily the thing that will get you fired. And you kind of need to be able to have a way of assessing that over time.
I have 2 points to make to what you just said. So thank you for sharing that. The first is that the big driver, the ultimate overarching driver of the growth of all types of these solutions is that they're customized. They're customized to meet the need of a specific client and where that client is right now. So what's great about this tool, which Ravi's going to get to in a minute, is that the tool itself is customizable. It is not a one-size-fits-all rubric. The other great thing about the tool is that, as you just said, Josh, any one client's needs, they're going to change over time. The markets are dynamic. As everyone knows, just look at what's happening with endowments and foundations, and the landscape and the regulations today have changed. So what this tool provides is and I'm going to quote you, Josh, because you had shared your notes with me, it provides a structured way to address new concerns, changed concerns, right? Which are constantly evolving, as opposed to what often happens today. We hear that one or two new members come in with a particular concern, and then they turn the whole governance process around addressing that one concern. A lot of other babies get thrown out with the bathwater. So with that, Ravi, can you give us a little more details about this wonderful toolkit that we've just introduced?
Sure. So just to make this framework a little bit more tangible, we've come up with this graphic on the left-hand side. Based on all the research, the working group's input, and all the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years and beyond, we've come up with 3 overarching categories of capabilities, of service, of value: investments, operations, and service. Each of those, in turn, are comprised of various things. Now, obviously, investments is the one that readily comes to mind, right? So that's always been around. But I think the point here is that even within investments, a customized solution of any kind, much less OCIO, you're delivering more than one thing. You're delivering, of course, investment alpha and benchmark relative performance, but very often you're also delivering beta. You're delivering strategic asset allocation, asset liability management, risk management, and so on. So we're not going to get into each of these subcategories right now, but that is the overarching framework, and we think it's important for that consistency to keep that basis of what you're delivering in mind and bring that to the valuation table. Now, on the right-hand side, quickly, the way the tool works is each of these capabilities are weighted, and to Amanda's point about customization, the user, the client, whoever's using it, it could be the provider themselves, relationship management function, for example, that it's doing self-evaluation, weights each of these categories. And then the tool comes up with an overarching weighted scheme. Let's move on to the next slide and dig a little bit deeper. Okay, so the idea is not to get into the subcategories, but basically we've built this tool where each of the subcategories in turn are rated and weighted. I think part of the beauty of this framework that the group came up with is that some of these can be very quantitative. For example, performance relative to a benchmark, right? And it can accommodate, for example, the CFA standard, if that works. Not that we're endorsing that unilaterally, because that has its issues as well. But my point is that's a quantitative metric. But importantly, you can also incorporate your satisfaction with non-quantifiable or service type metrics, responsiveness, access to the investment team, thought leadership. So how satisfied are you, or how good is the provider relative to your expectations or relative to others that you work with in delivering those services? Again, to Amanda's point, you can customize all this. We've developed a default framework, but if you are a unique provider or there's certain elements of your proposition that you're delivering that's unique to you, that can be incorporated. And on the flip side, if you're an asset owner or a client that has very specific needs that may be, out of the ordinary, you can incorporate that as well. So And we recommend that you do this periodically. Let's move on to the next slide to demonstrate this. To all the points on governance that were just made, board members come and go. One of the most powerful things about this is that if you do this on a recurring basis, whether that's quarterly, semi-annually, even annually, you start to track that. And this is very simple, but extremely powerful because it automatically makes everybody get to the same page and extend their time horizon. So you're not fixating about the last data point on the right-hand side. You can pick up on certain trends. For example, if there is service drop-off or their investment capabilities are improving, or your needs change and you've changed the weightings and what's important to you. You can track all of this and it forms the basis for, we think, much more holistic and healthier conversations and ultimately the relationship between provider and client. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Ravi. Yeah. So I want to just add a couple of things before turning to Josh, who's going to give us an example of putting this into use, which we're very excited about, which is that the culmination of all of this work is we published it earlier this year in our Holistic Valuations Toolkit report. The public version of the report is available on our website. The full version of the report is available to all Chestnut Solutions Institute member firms, as well as the tool itself is available to be used by all Chestnut Solutions Institute members. And we are very much encouraging any interest by any other players in the marketplace, because we really believe that this is an important step toward the mission of the Institute. And now I'm going to sound like I'm evangelizing, and I am, which is to raise the bar for the entire industry for the benefit of the ultimate beneficiaries of all the asset owners around the world. So this is to help align all the asset owners and all the decision makers and keep them focused on the long-term outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And as solutions continue to grow and a higher and higher percentage of assets around the world are being managed on a solutions basis, whether you call it OCIO, whether you call it sleeves, whether it's customized products that we at the Institute call solutions, we think it's really important to drive this alignment and that's going to be to the benefit of everybody. So it's peace, love, and apple pie. And with that, Josh, can you take us through the case study of how you used this at JP Morgan and some of the really surprising things you learned?
Yeah, certainly. So, when you and Ravi asked me to think about this, I guess a little while back, I remember thinking to myself, like, it's one thing for me to socialize it with my team and folks here and say, what is our view? And I think that's obviously useful. But we all work in the client industry. We know that our clients' feedback is ultimately what is going to be the most useful. And so I wanted to field test it with a relatively new client that we won a couple of years ago. They have a couple $2 billion across multiple pools of assets. They were already in an OCIO relationship. So it was, just going from a similar model to ours. We're still in the honeymoon phase. So again, it's only 2 to 3 years into the relationship. And so I felt comfortable, working with the CFO just to say, look, I'm going to give you this tool, fill it out. I'm going to fill it out from my perspective. And then let's just sit down and compare notes. And, to your point, Amanda, there was definitely some interesting things that came from that discussion. And so let me just take you through some of those and then I'll summarize, I think the key takeaways. But what we learned is, I think the weightings weren't exactly what we, originally thought. There's the 3 categories: investments, operations, and then more of the ancillary or the strategic support. And we thought they really hired us to drive performance. And yes, that's obviously important, but at the end of the day, they know our investment capabilities are great. That's table stakes. They're a mission-based organization. And what was more important to them is like, are we in the right strategy? Are we thinking about our assets holistically relative to our business? This is a healthcare organization. And, they had this view that they also needed to be thinking about long-term strategic investments that actually live outside of our mandate. And so, this was just a way, I think, to, we've had this conversation with them in the past, but it was a way for her, I think, just to say, Josh, look, we care way more about our mission alignment than just marginal outperformance. And so, like I said, while I thought that they hired us to outperform, they were just really looking for our confidence that they're pointed in the right direction and then helping them stay there. So that was like point number one that I thought was like super useful. The second one, and I think we've all lived through this, is that, she oversees a team that does a lot of the day-to-day things, and operations were definitely a pressure point for not her, but more her staff. And, one of the things they did moving to, our model as an asset manager is we do a lot of, I think more things that just create more churn on their end, whether that's futures or doing more tactical trading. And at the end of the day, that made their day-to-day job, be a little bit more difficult in terms of reconciliation. And so, we're having an honest conversation about, do we need to have this level of sophistication, those tools inside the portfolio? When should we use them? When should we not? Because, every month when we have a check-in with them, it's definitely a continued point of, frustration with her team. And I think we're actually getting to a better spot because now we get a chance to explain as to why we're using these things, but then at the same time, are they absolutely necessary? And I think there's always a healthy balance between those two. The third, I think, is one that we all probably deal with, and it's benchmark and legacy assets. They had a huge legacy portfolio that, a private portfolio that we have to report on. And they were getting this feeling that we were holding them hostage to their legacy assets. And it's always a very delicate conversation because you want to make sure that you're taking credit for the things that you have control over, obviously, as a discretionary manager. But at the same time, you want to balance that with, hey, we're the OCIO of your entire portfolio. And so it was really about just on the margin, shifting our narrative to the investment committee so that, they felt like, we're doing the right thing, they're in control, we're in control. And I think that was just a mind shift that, resulted as, from this conversation. So if you did that type of thought exercise with clients, you would come up with different things. I think this was very specific to them. But what I would say about this tool is it allows you to surface disagreements productively, before they fester and turn into bigger things. Not all investment committees are going to tell you what they're thinking. I'm sure some of us are on investment committees. You have executive sessions after where you're allowed to kind of speak your mind. But even sometimes that doesn't always happen. You might be busy, you might not be paying attention. Investment committee members are always busy. And so they're not always going to tell you, what's on their mind. And I think what this can do is just be some kind of a safe framework for them to voice things that matter to them so that you can have an open dialogue about it. And so ultimately where we're trying to land on this, I think is, why would you hire your provider again today? Or why would you hire us again today? Because I think that's what this tool is trying to gently reinforce, over, using it over quarters or, annually. I think annually makes a lot of sense. And so that was the case study, but happy to take any questions on it from you, Ravi or Amanda, if you wanted to had any thoughts on that.
I've got a few questions for you, Josh. So
yeah, please.
So the first is, are you now using this with all your clients? Are you thinking about using it with more clients? Do you think there would be learnings from repeating the exercise?
So the answer is it's a little bit in between yes and no. I think with this particular client, she was very much open to the idea of coming back to it. She hasn't brought it up since we last talked to her. I think more what I think our team is focused on is how do we not necessarily make them fill out the tool, but I think that's what maybe one of the pieces of feedback that you and I have talked about is sometimes it can be another thing that we're putting onto our clients. So what I think we do is use it more in the background to help us frame a conversation around it as we're having, our monthly check-ins. And so I think it's a mix of both. I think certain clients where maybe we haven't checked in a while, I feel like it's a very worthwhile exercise of doing this. Whereas like this client that I currently did it with, I think now that it's out in the open, we can just we feel comfortable just having the conversation.
Yeah, it's also a tool you could use, as we mentioned earlier, if there are new members of the board, it's something else you could turn to kind of bring them up to
Exactly.
speed. And yep. So, we do here at Chestnut, we've always done a lot of traditional market research and client satisfaction surveys. Do you think this tool can replace or enhance OCIO and Solutions client satisfaction studies that managers regularly do with their clients?
I think enhance is definitely the right thing because all the providers are going to have their own customer satisfaction check-in where like they go through their checklist that they have ratings. What I think might be interesting about this one is, and I think that having the independence of it and being maybe outside of what JP Morgan is doing, this is something that's like an industry standard. That to me is where I think the enhancement is because a lot of times we have our list and I don't know if I haven't looked at our customer satisfaction survey that we do, but I can't imagine it. I don't know how much it changes year over year. I don't know if it's like really capturing some of these things. I don't see that personally. I think some of this is, I think, hitting on the nerve that I think is important, which is like it can evolve, it can change, there can be new things that can be added to it. That's the type of dynamism I think with this type of tool that's helpful.
And what do you do when stakeholders on the client side don't agree with each other? Have you seen tension between the investment committee and the chief financial officer, the chief investment, CIO, and how do you navigate that?
Well, I think the first thing it does is it actually just points that out. Every investment committee board member comes with their own perspective, and that's why you have committees because you want to bring you want to have intellectual dissent because you ultimately will get to a better spot. And so I think more or less, I think it focuses on bringing those things to the surface and you can address them usually so you might have a very differing opinion on risk tolerance and things of that nature. But I think ultimately this just allows to put those issues out on the table and you can have an open dialogue about it.
All right, I have one last question for you.
Fire.
What do you think are the most commonly underappreciated areas where OCIs and solutions providers are actually bringing value and clients overlook it until something breaks or is about to break?
Yeah, it's definitely I think on the operational side. I can go a laundry list of things that matter for organizations, whether it's year-end audits, whether it's understanding the positions in your portfolio to the extent you have liquidity events, and just it's more of like the day-to-day things that make, because if you have people who are focused on these pools of assets and it takes up a chunk of their day, if you can somehow make their life a little bit easier and they can be more productive within the organization, that to me is like where a ton of value is unlocked. I think a lot of the stuff around strategic design and investment capabilities, look, we're all like, that's like table stakes in a lot of ways. Yes, there's some small differences here and there that I think are super important to understand. But like the operational stuff, I think is one key one. I think risk management is probably a second one that's in there. There's a number of ways you can think about risk management. Risk has many faces, but just being able to know what you own, understand the exposures you have when there's certain like events that are happening, whether that's Liberation Day, the Silicon Valley Bank, actually how you get that information into your clients' hands, I think is super important. And not something that I think when you go through the search process, you don't know if you really appreciate some of those nuances as to like how data is gathered and shared. So those are probably two areas I'd call out.
Yeah, on the operations piece, I'll just add because the Chestnut Solutions Institute is going to Canada and OCIO and Solutions are growing very rapidly up there. And a lot of it is driven by operations to the point where some are referring to it almost as OCOO because that's such a pain point. Ravi, did you have any other questions for Josh, or do you want to get to how we leverage this, other ways to leverage it beyond what Josh and his folks did at JP Morgan?
Yeah, I think we should move on. I also want to address a question that came through in the chat and then wrap up. I don't have anything else for Josh.
Okay. All right. We'll go to the next step.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
Great. So there are three ways. Actually, before I get into it, one of the questions that came through is, okay, how do we incorporate performance? And I just want to address that. I mean, there is a alpha component under the investment quadrant. This doesn't preclude you from using traditional reporting and alpha versus benchmarks. You would just adjust your criteria to incorporate, for example, if you beat the benchmark, get a satisfaction of 85%. If you beat it by a significant margin, perhaps you've baked that into your investment policy, or you've protected on the downside, depending on what your performance expectations are, is you can translate that into a satisfaction score, et cetera. So you can have other parts of your governance mechanism that include more hard and fast rules or quantitative measures. But the idea behind this is you translate that into this framework so it all sort of adds up.
It adds up and it puts it in a context, right? So that it's weighted and it's not 100% of the focus.
Yeah. And when it comes to products and fees, similarly, we've got subcategories there that talks about investment vehicle flexibility or product availability, active, passive, private assets. So all those can similarly translate into a satisfaction score and fees as well. So it all is incorporated in this tool. That's the nice thing about this. This isn't rigid. It incorporates other metrics that you may have on the side. Now, when we brought this out, our members really liked it, but they said, okay, so how do we actually use this? So we've thought of three different ways, and I want to address them. One, Amanda said at the outset, if you join the Institute and you're a member, whether you're a component provider, asset manager, or a consultant, or a OCIO or solutions provider, you get all of this and it's available, the research behind it, consultation with us, etc. And you can use the toolkit across your client base like Josh did. Second, if you're not a member, we are happy to engage in a conversation with you. And perhaps you're a single strategy asset manager that's interested in how you might adapt this to measuring value. And we're happy to talk about how you can sort of license this from us. And third, and probably most effective and comprehensive because it gets to this issue that Josh talked about, you don't want to add one more thing, is to engage us to conduct an independent client satisfaction assessment. Now, Chestnut does client assessments on the traditional side, evaluating client satisfaction periodically. We do that a lot. The beauty here is I think we've developed this framework which is especially pertinent to solutions and OCIO type of services. So we could administer this across your client base every, couple of years or something like that, or every year, and benchmark your relationship. So we would be able to capture a vast majority of your client satisfaction and then highlight relationships at risks or categories that may be a consistent pain point or room for improvement, et cetera, in addition to conducting interviews that will give you verbatim, live, direct feedback from clients. The other thing that I think for you guys who have not evaluated client satisfaction in the OCIO realm, by doing this, we actually think this can be valuable and potentially de-emphasize or even avoid having the client go out to bid every 3 years. At the Institute, and not that that's not a good thing if you're an asset owner to go out to bid periodically, but in the context of solutions on OCIO, the Institute doesn't believe this type of relationship should be shopped every 3 years, much less traditional relationships. So this is a way to get on the front foot and actually make sure, just like Josh did, you're touching base with your clients, you're actually taking their feedback seriously, but actually in a tangible way. So then you can actually work on it and address some of these areas the way Josh did. So those are some ideas.
Yep. Thank you, Ravi and Josh. I just want to address a couple other questions that have come through and put it in a context and add, first of all, that Chestnut does not, has never conduct OCIO searches. The Chestnut Solutions Institute is independent. We have no horse in this race. However, we have done client satisfaction assessments, as Ravi said, and as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing it since we launched. I've got a long background in research. We've always done market research. You got to hear the voice of the client. And to answer one of the questions, yes, we believe client satisfaction should always be done on an independent basis because that's how you get real, candid feedback. As Josh said, every firm may have their own metrics and their own questions, but doing it independently is the way to go. Another question was, how can you benchmark if everyone is customizing the tool? The way that we do that, we would say there's an art to the science of research. If all you're doing is taking quantitative numbers to the same question over and over, that you're asking about what are inherently individual customized mandates being offered by a wide range of heterogeneous, very different providers, what you're going to get back is going to be data that is completely not useful at all. So here at the Institute, we have a sense of, we have our own rubric of different types of providers. So we know we're comparing like with like. We have our own rubric of different types of asset owners. So we can divide the different types of clients that any one provider has and interpret what we're hearing accordingly with what we know, because we're in the marketplace every day, is what's actually going on in the market now and not the data that we have gathered over the last year or 5 years, which is probably not even relevant. Josh, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it was to the question about how is client satisfaction benchmarked if HVM is simply provides a weighted score that varies for every client. So I think there's two valuable data points. There's one is what matters across those categories and the subcategories within them, right? And that those all get weights. But then I think the thing that is the second part of it is how are you doing relative to that objective? And so that's how it's standardized across, like you can look at it, every client might have different weightings, but then how you're doing relative to those weightings is like that's the feedback for like the provider. And I think that's what can be useful, but then also what clients care about. So the weightings themselves is also the thing that I think is important and could be, maybe some clients don't know what they don't have. And so that's why I think the thing that I keep coming back to that it makes me like excited about this is if you did it independently and surveyed a ton of different clients, you're going to get a lot of data about like what matters to them that might be surprising to, I think, the industry at writ large. And then the second thing, like I said, is, well, how are you doing relative to those things? And those are the two kind of vectors I think the tool is used for.
Thanks, Josh. All right. Well, Josh and Ravi, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. And to the audience, thank you for all these great questions. The ones we didn't get to, we're going to get back to you offline. And we hope you found this event helpful. And with that, have a great day.
Chestnut Advisory Group is a boutique, practitioner-led management consulting firm dedicated to asset managers and investment solutions providers. In addition to the Chestnut Solutions Institute, our advisory practice areas include distribution strategy, M&A support, go-to-market, and implementation and coaching services. This podcast is owned and produced by the Chestnut Solutions Institute. If you like this content and would like to access more insights, webinars, and podcasts, please check out our website, chestnutadvisory.com.